Welcome back. As we saw in our first lecture on justice, that Aristotle divides between two types. The general notion of dikaiosune as simply the right-acting person, and the right-acting person is the person who in society promotes virtue in general, and the statesperson who is able to, through correct laws, make sure that society reaches the state of eudaimonia or flourishing. And so, of course, what we're really concerned about is the kind of person who does this. And that's the particular virtue of justice. The fair person, the person who is, as Aristotle will say, is equitable. Because Aristotle agrees with the general notion that whatever we mean by justice, it has to do with some type of treating people equally. So you notice the word treating. Therefore, justice, as we said before, is not a singular virtue. It's not something you can have by yourself. It involves action, but a certain kind of action, which Aristotle calls transaction, transactional. So what does that mean? Well, in modern English, when we say transaction, we usually mean something have to do with business. But the word transaction just simply means actions that take place between multiple people. And so since justice has to do with the distribution of advantages, of benefits in society, either you taking or receiving benefits, or you giving benefits to others, then it follows that justice must be among people. It must be about actions between people. So now there's the ideal of the way in which the person who is truly just in a truly just society is just, and that's about the division of benefits, which he calls distributive justice. But then what happens when the ideal isn't met? Then you have to rectify that, and that is called rectificatory justice, which is just about how the just person corrects inequalities. So let's talk about the ideal first, and then we'll understand how we can rectify to go back to the ideal. So as we said, the just person divides benefits equally. The question is, when we use the word equal, we mean equal in some amount, according to some standard. And the question is, well, what is the standard used? And everyone agrees, Aristotle states, that the equality mentioned here is not equality of persons, but equality of merit, or desert, as we might say. Everyone agrees that when you distribute benefits to others, they should have equal merit for benefits and therefore get equal amounts. If their merit is different, then the distribution should be proportional to their merit. So we see there's equality in merit, and that the distribution has to be proportional to the actual merit. But Aristotle recognizes that different societies with different political systems are going to have different views about what actually it means to say a person deserves or merits a certain number or amount of goods. So, for example, if we're in a democratic society, and don't think we are in a democratic society, what he's talking about when he's talking about democratic is a strict democratic society, one that says all you need to be in order to have equality is a citizen. In other words, as long as you are a member of the society, no matter what you do, no matter how much you contribute, no matter how little you contribute to the society, you have an equal amount of merit and therefore deserve an equal distribution of goods. Probably the closest kind of society that we can think of that's like that is communism. They go according to the strict egalitarian standard. And of course, Aristotle would disagree with that idea, because then that would mean that, say you have two people, one who contributes to farming and does such a great job that the food production is increased on their farm, whereas you have someone else who's lazy, who's doing nothing, but they would get an equal food distribution, and that seems unjust to someone like Aristotle and perhaps to us. So even though the democratic standard is a standard that's used, he's not going to agree with it. The other kind of standard or kind of society is an unequal society, a society that divides, say, according to money or family connections. We would call that in modern days an aristocratic society, but that's not what he means by aristocratic. That's not what the original Greek. Oligarchy means rule by the few. And so here the idea would be if you are a certain class or a family, have a certain blood connection, then that would divide merit. If you were a noble, then you would have, by your very birth, more merit than a peasant. And again, Aristotle disagrees with that idea, but recognizes that this is how some societies divide merit. So what's the best way for Aristotle? It's the aristocratic way. The word aristocratic literally means rule by the best. So the idea is the amount to which you contribute to society or to the associations that you're in should be the proportion to which goods are measured out to you. Thus, the idea here is according to what you do. It's according to your excellence of contribution. And you might say that this aligns more with our idea of equality of opportunity. Say, for example, you have a man and a woman. Both are doing the same job, both are doing the same amount of work, and both are doing the same quality of work. According to Aristotle, they both should be receiving the same pay. They should both be receiving the same number of benefits. That's the aristocratic ideal, the excellence of contribution. So you'll notice that the feminist movement nowadays that argues that you should have equal pay for women is really going according to the classical aristocratic ideal of what it means for someone to have merit. And thus, you see a certain blindness here. Justice is blind because it doesn't pay attention to who you are. It only pays attention to what you do, your contribution. And thus, distributive justice should be blind in the distribution of benefits in the sense that it doesn't ask who you are. Are you my brother or are you a complete stranger? But what have you done? So thus you see the idea of proportionality in equality. It's not a simple equal distribution. It is rather an equal consideration, a blind consideration that doesn't consider persons except insofar as what they deserve. So Aristotle says here's the proportionality. Imagine two different people doing equal amounts of work in a job, doing equal quality in their work. Then it should be that person one is to the amount of pay that they receive equally or in ratio to what person two is to the amount of pay that they receive. So if person one is of higher merit, then their pay should be higher than person two. But if they're equal merit, then their pay should be equal. And thus, we have equality of proportion, not strict equality. So that's the ideal. And the just person is the person who takes only what they deserve, what they merit, no more, no less. And the just person is also the person who gives out in a blind way, only what people deserve, no more, no less. But we know that in real society, that hardly ever happens. Most of the time, there is this inequality. People who deserve more get less, and those who deserve less often get more. As the old saying goes, the race is not to the swift, nor the contest to the strong. So what do we do if we are just and that happens? That is why it is so important in our society to have a standard of rectificatory justice, the standard of how we rectify these injustice. And this is really when courage and temperance comes into play, because now what we have to do in order to rectify inequality is offend people often and hurt them. Because whereas distributive justice is equal, rectificatory justice seeks to correct an inequality, and in order to do that, you have to treat people unequally. But you have to do it in a just way. You have to do it in a way that doesn't go too much nor too little. So again, you see how in both of these standards you have this happy medium. What is the happy medium? Returning to or maintaining equality. So in rectificatory justice, I'm trying to return to that state of inequality between these two people. So say, for example, Joe Schmo, person one, decides to steal John's money and therefore has more money than he deserves. And John has less money than he deserves. So the idea is to return to that state where John has all and only the money he deserves. He gets his money back. And Joe has all and only the money he deserves and perhaps is punished for causing the suffering that he caused to John. And thus you see that we have to have some standard for the judge who is going to return John and Joe to the states of equality that they had originally, but was destroyed because of this act of stealing. So how is that going to work out? Now, normally when we think of retributive or rectificatory justice, we think of the standard of what is called Lex Talionis, or the standard of the tooth. The earliest expression of this is in Hammurabi's code, and that's why it's called the tooth. But you see this in the Bible, in the standard of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Aristotle doesn't agree with that. That is called direct reciprocity or simple reciprocity. Reciprocity is just the word of giving what you receive and getting what you've given. But the problem with that is that it doesn't always work because different things have been taken, and now you have to have some standard for judging these different things and how they go into equalize with each other. Let's get more specific on that. For example, say you kill my brother, okay? The standard of Lex Talionis says that I should go ahead and kill your brother, but that's obviously unjust. Or let's say that you rape my wife. The standard of Lex Talionis says I should rape your wife. Again, unjust. So what I have to do is I have to figure out as a judge how I rectify this inequality, how I repair the damage done to the victim without doing an additional injustice. And that, therefore, requires not reciprocity, but what he calls proportional reciprocity, a measuring of the damages and a measuring of an equalizing of values for different things with different measures. We understand this already. In the United States, we use dollars, but if I go to Europe, I can't use dollars. I have to use euros. So there has to be a rate of exchange so that when I give the dollars over, I get an equal value for what I've given. And that's what requires a rate of exchange. Now the question is, what will that rate of exchange be? So for example, say I steal John's cow, and I have no cow to return to him. Then what we have to do is figure out either how much the cow is worth, and this is where money has come into play. But even money requires a way in which we measure how much money was the cow worth. And Aristotle says the only way to measure that is in a relative way. What would people pay for it? So we see that value is determined by demand. What are people willing to pay for that particular thing? And so here's where justice becomes, in a certain sense, relative. It's not relative in its general principles, but relative just like health is. As far as health is concerned, what it is to be a healthy human is the same for everybody. But if we have a person who is severely overweight and we have a person who's severely underweight, what it is to them to have a healthy weight and what they have to do is going to be very different from each other. The person who's severely overweight has to go on a diet. The person who's severely underweight needs to eat a lot more, does not need to be put on a diet. In the same sense, even though we need to have the standard of for everybody of reciprocity and proportional reciprocity, what people value is different. And so therefore, just as there are different standards of merit, there are going to be different standards of value. But always it will be what in that society is considered valuable. So for example, in Indian society, a cow is considered a lot more valuable than in our society. That would be like giving someone your entire bank account. But in the United States, a cow is valuable, but not that valuable. And so, thus, the standards of exchange are going to be different, just like with money in society. What has to be determined, again, is according to custom and natural law, what would be fitting. So, thus we see the just person. The just person is the person who ideally is not going to take more than they should take, nor less than they should take, nor are they going to give more than they should give, nor less than they should give. They're going to give and take blindly, not according to who the person is, but according to what they deserve. And what they deserve will depend on how much they have done, not who they are. But when the standard is violated, as it is often done in society, then what we need is a way of rectifying that. It can't be rectified simply by eye for eye or tooth for tooth, because that produces injustice. Rather, there has to be a proportional rate of reciprocity that requires a rate of exchange. So the details of this need to be worked out in every society, but the general standards are the same.